I am the light of the world. That phrase is at the center of our talk today. It's like most phrases tossed around in Christian circles today, in that most of us are familiar with it. We've all read it in John chapter 8. And I'm sure that we all agree that Jesus is exactly that, the light of the world. But my hope is that today we can take a few minutes and uncover that phrase, where it comes from, why Jesus would choose this timing to give himself that title. So here we go. By now you probably figured out that Narrogate's pretty big on the idea of text in context. So we have to ask what the context of our passage is today. It's not hard to find. You only got to back up one chapter. When John 7 takes place, Jesus is in Jerusalem attending the festival it's called Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. It's one of 7 Jewish festivals listed in Leviticus 23 that were held in Jerusalem every year. It was mandated that every healthy adult Jewish male attend these feasts. There were spring feasts and fall feasts, and then there's one kind of stuck in the middle. The spring feast, they included Passover, unleavened bread, and the Feast of First Fruits. 50 days later comes the middle one, Shavuot, or Pentecost. Then in the fall, it was Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets, and the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. And finally, the one where we find our story today, Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. We don't have time here to outline the entire feast, so I just want to cover the part that sheds light on our passage in John 8. Sorry for the pun, okay? I just couldn't resist. Sheds light. Okay, this whole feast is designed to remind the Jewish people that God sustained them in the wilderness with water and fire. Water for the day to quench their thirst and to keep them cool, and fire at night to give them warmth and light. So every day of this week-long feast, they would celebrate in 2 parts: the water ceremony in the morning and the illumination ritual at night. It's the nighttime celebration that gives meaning to our passage today. So let's talk about the temple where all this stuff took place. The temple stood in the middle of a giant courtyard, or a series of courtyards actually. There was the outer courtyard, they called the Court of Gentiles. There was the Court of Women, and beyond that, the inner court for Jewish males only. They also called it the Court of Priests. There were 15 steps or stairs that connected the inner court with the Court of Women. Each night the priests would descend these steps with torches in hand, and then starting in the temple in the Court of Women, they would walk up to these 4 menorahs, or candlesticks. Each of these menorah had 4 bowls of oil at the top. These things were over 70 feet tall, and each of the bowls of oil were so big that the wicks were made from the knotted up, discarded robes of the priests. First century historians tell us that when these menorah were lit and their light reflected off the polished and gilded surface of the temple, every single courtyard in all of Jerusalem was illuminated by the light. Since Jerusalem sits on the highest hill, the light could be seen for miles beyond the city wall. With light gleaming in the night, the priests would regather at the Court of Women and walk back up those 15 steps to the inner court. They would step together onto the first step, and the festival attendees would sing very loudly Psalm 120. The second step, Psalm 121. Every step was one more psalm, all the way through Psalm 134. That's one of the reasons that this collection of 15 Psalms, 120 through 134, are referred to as the Psalms of Ascent. Now remember that this whole thing is about giving thanks to God for water and fire in the desert. It was the light of God's fire that guided the Israelites through the wilderness and into the promised land. Now that the Jews are settled in that land and they have God's law in hand, they're instructed to live by that law as a picture of what true life and submission to God looks like. The law of God is, in Jewish minds, the light that shines in a dark world. The picture's vivid. The light of the menorah reflected off the beautiful surface of the temple. Inside the temple is the Ark of the Covenant, which holds the tablets of the law. The light shines as a beacon to the whole world, inviting them to approach the one true living God in sacrifice and obedience. They are now the light in a dark world. Or are they? Think about what Paul said in Romans 2. He said, indeed, you're called a Jew and you rest on the law. You make your boast in God and you know his will and you approve the things that are excellent, being instructed out of the law, and are confident that you yourselves are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, having a form of knowledge and truth in the law. But Paul goes on to say that they're misguided in their thinking. The law was just a form of truth, and they can't even keep that. The actual light of the world was to come in Messiah. He's not a form of truth. He is the truth. And Jesus is going to say so in John 14. The Jews were looking for their Messiah, this embodiment of truth and light. Isaiah 60 opens up with God talking to the nation of Israel about the coming Messiah, and he says, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you. The Gentiles shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. You see it? So now Jesus is standing in the outer court of the temple, and he declares, I am the light of the world. I'm your promised Messiah. He's the fulfillment of the law. He's the embodiment of truth. He's the hope of the nation. But now we have to face that same claim. See, if Jesus is the light of the world, then he's the fulfillment of God's intention for man. That means that truth and life are bound up in him. I just wonder how we stack up against the Jews who were so opposed to that idea. They believed that religious performance was the key to righteous relationship. But Jesus shows up on the scene and inverts their religious paradigm. He says that they judge others based on religious performance, but he, the Savior, hasn't come to judge at all. He sees the whole thing from a different perspective because his view is not tainted by the things of the world. His thoughts are in line with the Father. I wonder how differently we might think and act today if we set aside our expectations of religious goodness and we simply saw people in need of a Savior. What if we committed ourselves to simply letting the light of love, hope, and life shine through our existence in a dark world? John opens his gospel by saying that in Jesus there is life. And that life is the light of men. And that light shined in the darkness. Paul picks up this thought in Philippians 2 and he says, do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Maybe today we can shine a little brighter. Maybe today we can believe Jesus when he told us, you are the light of the world. God, give us grace today to shine the light of life and hope to everyone we encounter.